So we know that we cannot develop in the developing world because we are beaten all the time. That's the point, that we are beating and that we are being wasted. Our lives are being wasted way before their time. Is the process that's this law of capital or this law of profitability. And the war in Gaza just is part and it's a principal part of the war against humanity. Why? Because there are two points of contention, two crucial points, geographic points: Taiwan and Israel. And Israel is much more important than Taiwan in basically making sure that the Arab, the Muslim and African masses, the Asian and African masses, are split down the line by this slice, near the Sinai Peninsula there. So it's a geographically strategic point that divides the world, divides the masses, and does not let them, divides Africa from Asia, and that's a big division. There are no roads between Africa and Asia, and the third world cannot trade with each other on land because of this. Apart from the fact that that the power structure is so tilted as a result of imperialist victories throughout history.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rania Khalek, and this is Dispatches. We know imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, and today's late-stage imperialism has become more barbaric than ever, with a rising accumulation of death and waste. Increasingly, war and genocide aren't just a means to an end, but also part of the end in and of itself. So where does Israel's genocide in Gaza fit into this late-stage global imperialist order? What does it mean about the role of Zionism in the Middle East? How do the U.S. wars on other Middle Eastern countries factor in? How has China managed to escape this and the neoliberal rot that has consumed so much of the world? And how come some Western Marxists get it so wrong? Joining me to discuss this is Ali Kadri, author of many books, including Arab Development Denied, Dynamics of Accumulation by Wars of Encroachment, The Unmaking of Arab Socialism, China's Path to Development Against Neoliberalism, and his most recently published book, The Accumulation of Waste, A Political Economy of Systemic Destruction. Ali, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you on.
Thank you.
So there's so much I want to talk to you about, but I think a really good place to start is with your latest book. You've written a great deal, obviously, about imperialism and socialism in the Arab world and beyond. And in your most recently published book, you argue that we've reached a stage of imperialism that you call the accumulation, or capitalism, I should say, that you call the accumulation of waste. In your book, you write, imperialist war, in particular, the purest form of waste, is seen as value-creating activity whose saleable product is the premature death of labor. So can you explain to our audience, in layman's terms, what that means?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, it's in all terms, it means the same thing. Well, it means that basically that if we look at the world now, and we've accumulated a lot of wealth, we've accumulated a lot of cars, refrigerators, and all this, these commodities, we call wealth, and we've done quite a good job. We've got a lot of wealth, since technology has improved, productivity has improved, and so on. So obviously but at the same time, we've produced, most reports say that the planet is heating up and that, it is catastrophic, and many pollutants and plastics and so forth. So alongside these commodities, we've produced a lot of, a terrible amount of waste, and also, aside from, we've wasted a lot of nature. We've wasted so much of nature that if we think about it, if we think that the planet is not going to support life if we go on like this in the future, that means the situation now is pretty terrible. That means if we, any stock taking and assessment of the situation, we'll find that we have we have accumulated much more wasteful things than we have accumulated things that are useful. So and much of the waste that we've accumulated, we've also, since we've wasted nature in the process of making commodities, people are part of nature, so we've basically wasted people as well. And it seems that capitalist production throughout its history had required the waste of nature and people, more so people than nature at the beginning, but as of late in this century of the last century of high speed industrialization, we've produced so much pollutants as well. So together, this waste amounts to a tremendous amount of damage that we've done to the planet and to society. And that represents the phenomena in which we're in now. We have to study this social relations, how we've done things in the past, to arrive at such a point where we are basically self-consuming relative to the good that we can do. We appear to be self-consuming. Because if the planet is not going to support life and the water levels are going to rise and so on, that could only mean that that we've arrived. This phenomena is actually the end result of capitalism, and capitalism, of course, is headed by the Western civilization. It's colonialism. Europe and now the United States, the heir to Europe, were at the helm of history. They were in charge of making everything. And throughout this idea of, this process of making more wealth, more commodities that they sell for profits, not that they make them to make society better or to help, improve, the conditions in nature or the metabolism between man and nature and so on. Capital makes things to sell for profits, and since it regulates itself because it is in power, it makes everything. It cares less for the damage it imparts onto society. It lets society cover the damage, and so when addressing issues of social science, when we want to know why have we gotten to this position. When we want to address this, we have to look at the phenomena. I mean, most studies, most people say, look, capitalism has produced much wealth. It is very progressive. Yeah. Well, that cannot be said anymore, right? And if it cannot be said anymore, we want to know why did we arrive to this point? Were we always like that? And in my research, of course, I find the obvious, which is, right, yes, we were always like that. We were always destroying people and nature to make money. And we have destroyed far more people and nature in the process of making money than is necessary. So much so that we are now, causing diseases, and, we're probably causing the planet to fall into a position that it will no longer be able to support life. And so the whole idea that capitalism is progressive and, that we should be better capitalists than the third world appears to have been a chimera, appears to have been a joke, rather, you see. And many people don't say these things, but capitalism is not a sausage that can be, saying, I'm going to take this end of the sausage, you take this end of the sausage. Capitalism is a historical and a social process. And it's governed by, the relation that, very simple relation. I want to make profit. And if I can make profit at any cost, or I can shift my cost to society, I'll make more profits. So how do I reduce cost? I reduce cost if I pay very low wages, if I don't pay for the trees I cut, if I pollute the environment without paying for the environment, and so on. This is the source of my profit. And so this has been always the case. This has been always the case. And if you have that law of profitability, that idea that I want to make money at any expense, commanding the world, then of course we're not going to be able to stop either the social or the environmental disaster. So there's this relationship, which is, you can call capitalism. I make money at any cost, and I exclude the rest of the, capital. Let's call it capital, and I exclude the rest of society from the gains I make, or I just make things because I want to sell them. I'm not concerned whether they're going to harm people. Uh, that aspect of things is absolutely how should I say, impossible to sustain. I mean, and there isn't enough work to disclose that the environment will not be solved by basically talking about, zero pollution or paying trillions to the people that have suffered from it or something like that. That's not going to solve the problem, because if your profit's always going to depend on the amount of damage you do to society and nature, then there is no way to fix the problem unless you fix that social relationship that organizes all of social life, that organizes the reproduction of life. And unfortunately, this can only be done through planning. And of course, planning was conducted by, people, socialist economies, and socialist economies are the antithesis of the system that reproduces by waste. But these have been so much demonized, such that it is impossible to basically, especially people in the Western Hemisphere, to convince people in the Western Hemisphere that the market system does not work. I mean, it's not possible also to convince them, because they have been benefactors, relative benefactors, right. Beneficiaries, relative beneficiaries of the system itself, because we live in a two-tier system where, some people make a lot of money and some people don't make a lot of money. And of course, the reason why some in the North makes much more than the South, it's because the South is exploited. We cannot have, and that's pretty much the case. We cannot have this. You can, and the whole system is based on false ideas. Like, you don't see the great amount of waste. You don't also see that the world does not have a crisis of scarcity. We can feed everybody. Most of the crises we have are crises of overproduction. In fact, the crisis of overproduction is always present with us. We produce so much of everything, and we can, make people live better off everywhere, and so on and so forth. But this idea that, so when I say that, that there is waste, I'm not saying anything new. I'm just saying, look at the phenomenon. Look at what appears to be the most obvious thing, which we have wasted people and we have wasted nature. But since the onset of capitalism, which we trace back to something like 1500 or circa or something like this, right? Until now, there's probably around 1 billion people that perished in colonial wars and other wars, and and the amount of plastics and the amount of pollution. So if we're looking at the achievement of civilization, which is the material of the material and spiritual achievements. So what we have is in terms of material achievements, we have a lot of dead people and a lot of pollutants. And in terms of spiritual achievements, we have a world which lives by chauvinistic ideology, reproduces by chauvinistic ideology. Because if you want to keep the other, very poor in order to take the resources from them, then you have to actually devise a sort of ideology that says, look, that guy doesn't deserve it because of his gender, color, ethnicity, whatever. You devise the identity that suits, an ethic which is unethical, by which, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. But it used to be, it used to be that sort of rich get rich and poor get poor. It used to be in a sort of bad, but still benign compared to the situation now, because if we're saying that the planet is 1 minute to midnight, the course of the environmental disaster and the course of the political disaster that is unfolding, which could lead us to some sort of nuclear conflagration at one point or another. People are talking about that these days. So this is not, no, it is no longer possible to accept that the poor stay poor and the rich stay, gain by making the poor poorer. And the system cannot function another way. It is the system cannot function in any other way. If somebody says we're going to have a Keynesian approach, oh yes, we're going to be like dentists and we're going to fix, give more money here. That's not going to fix the situation, because giving money is in the power of those who print the money. The only power that prints the money is the power that pollutes, and it's the fact that its profits don't come from the sphere of circulation, from the printing of money. They come from the very fact that there are people who work and spend a lifetime at work, and instead of making something for themselves, they die early and they die poor, and they leave much of the work and much of the value they produce to capital. That's how profits are going to be made, and there is no other way about it. And this is a diametrical opposition. It's not going to be solved. It's a contradiction that's going to stay with us for a long time.
Ali, I want to use it as a point to kind of like focus a bit on the Middle East here, because what you're describing when you talk about essentially these people working their entire lives, dying younger. In the Middle East, there's very much, the way imperialism functions, there's a lot of people dying. So I'm curious if you can relate what you're talking about to the way imperialism functions in the Middle Eastern region specifically. And I do eventually want to get to what's happening in Gaza. But I guess here I'm talking a bit more generally about U.S. wars in the region. There's been these catastrophic wars that have killed millions of people. Syria, Iraq, Libya, Yemen, so destructive, like in what you're talking about in terms of killing people, in terms of killing culture, killing spirituality, all of these things that sort of, how does all of that, how does that imperialism fit into this accumulation of waste?
Yes, another thing that people don't see, I said that people don't see the phenomena of waste. That basically when we say the planet is going to not be able to support life in the near future, well, it's going to be difficult to support life, then we're saying that we are in a terrible situation as it is right now. It's not, it has the issue, the disease has metastasized. It's pretty bad. And it's in the same way, another symptom of that, another another phenomenal case is the structural genocide of the system. Because when we have enough to make everybody live better off, because we produce too much, and yet we have people dying of hunger, this sort of, the wasting of people in that way is called, and the other things that, that make people miserable, that's called the structural genocide. That occurs all the time. If we, there's one food rapporteur once says that if you count to 4 or 5 seconds, there's a child under 10 who dies from hunger, unnecessarily dies from hunger. So the structural genocide is internal to capital, and it's there all the time. And there's also the direct genocides of capital. It's all a process of waste. We're wasting people before their time, and we're going to waste them also through war. War is also a matter. War is sort of utter waste, pure waste. Like, if we're looking for the purest waste, it's like, there's a German philosopher who put it this way. He says, well, if you put a lot of work and money in machines and in people, and then you throw them into war and you destroy them, that's just wasting resources. And so the system appears to have developed as of, in this day and age, to be able to sell the destruction, to be able to peddle the destruction as an industry and sell the destruction. So in war, what does war produce? It produces, it's like a structural genocide, but it's much faster. Structural genocides ends people's life before their due times. They're supposed to live to 50, 60, 100 on average, but they live to 40 or 30 or 40 or something like this. Well, in war, it's pretty much a much more dense situation of premature death. So in the region you are talking about, some estimates put, it's in the millions with, the different estimates, but in the millions of people dying, and of course they died. It's war kills, and that means it it prematurely. There are many more premature dead in the region, many more wasted people, and war produces the premature death. War hires. War is a factory-like situation. You have a machine, and then you hire a waged soldier a waged worker who's a soldier. You give him the machine, and you tell him to produce death. And so death is sells, and it's a very big item of sale. It's a very big item of sale because when you have when you have everything, under capitalism, we know everything is put up for sale. There's commodification, and if it's put up for sale, there's a price on everything. Everything has a price, and the price, of course, is a liquid in a complex structure. So there is spot price and future price. There's implicit price, explicit price. There's the price of the wage of a woman, for instance, nursing babies at home, which is something of a negative price, a very low price or something like this, a very low wage. And so everything is sort of priced in the system. And if you make, the more you commodify, if you commodify life and waste life, if you commodify nature and waste nature, you're actually getting the prices of life and nature intermeshed with the whole structure of prices from which profits originate. So if you pollute, for instance, right? If you pollute, you're going to cause diseases, and the medical bills are going to grow, and people are going to pay for the medical bills. There are prices for the pollution, and it's the same. If you go to war, you kill at a faster rate than pollution probably, and there are prices for the dead, which are the earnings of the financial sector that bought the bonds in order to fund the war because it had too much.
Wow.
You have a situation where if you shorten lives, you make profits. You shorten life with pollution, because in the end, people who live a shorter life on average cost less, because they live shorter lives. You don't have to pay much for their pensions, for their schooling.
Okay,
That's why there are austerity programs.
So let me ask you this. So this is when we talk about what you're saying. The primary reason for imperialism in the Middle East is, of course, securing resources, right? Like oil, most importantly, oil. So does the sort of a profiting off of death that you're talking about, is that a part of an industry that's created by the primary reason for being there, which is the oil and the resources? Or does that then start to become the primary thing? Like why, like what's imperialism's main function in the Middle East? Is it creating more wars so that we can sell more weapons so weapons companies can make money? Or is the primary reason securing the oil and the stuff is just the other death and accumulation of death is like extra profit?
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, first of all, this is the extraction of oil, copper, whatever around the world, and even timber or.
Okay.
Never exists alone. You have people where there is oil, and you have people where there is copper, like in Chile. You have people, and so you have people who work with nature, and these peoples are entwined with nature. They're nature themselves physically, but they're also subjects of nature because they have to work with nature to produce their own lives. I have to dig the land to make a produce of sorts, right? So there is never a land without people, or a land without resources without, people. And so the first thing that imperialism, this intensification of capital, what is imperialism? It's, hyper making money. It's an intensification of capital. capital. I want, to make money at any cost, and that's the law of profitability, right? So when you have something like that occurring, the first thing you're going to extract is the people, not the oil. You're going to extract the people. You're going to make sure that the people are beaten into submission in order to give you the resource that they have for cheaper prices. And that, so the industry of extractivism is reified. It's made into, there are things dealing with things. But this such is not the case. In the Arab world, in the Arab region, in the Arab Iranian region, there is oil, but there's a high price to pay for that oil because people have to surrender. They cannot be in command of that resources and negotiate a higher price to get a better life and so on and so forth, right? So you must suppress their power of negotiating. So you go in there and you make a war. And then, so you make a war, and the war itself, you have the oil, you're getting the oil cheap, and you're making money out of the war as well because the war is also paid for and it's an industry. Right? So when you kill people, you produce dead people in war, you are making, money off the productivity of war. The idea that you make that. And so you extracted lives, you extracted the oil, and you made money on the extraction of life. You made money on the extraction of oil. And what matters in the end, there's a spin-off, a third situation in which, because you win a war against, the poor people in the third world, be they Arabs or Africans, or something like this, these working classes, they're masses, they're poor people is not the right word to say. They're masses who have been beaten into submission. And historically been beaten into submission. I mean, they can't breathe, really. I mean, you would say you can't breathe. It's like there are 900 or something military bases and so many, I mean, if you say anything, you're going to pay a high price. So in such a situation, when the US or Europe, win wars against, extract lives and extract resources through wars, what you're going to have is their power is going to increase. They're going to, on the international stage, they're going to say we're much more powerful. And if they say they're much more powerful, their ideas are going to become much more powerful as well. And if their ideas, what are their ideas? What is this, spirit of, of the rational man of the West? What is it? It is an idea that says, look, we have people here that want to protect their way of life. They're living much better. They're better cultured. They eat with a fork and a knife, and they listen to operas. While the others, are sitting under coconuts or, drinking tea in the deserts. So, they're much better. And, and on the whole, they're Muslims or they're Africans or they're, Buddhist or Hindus or whatever. And, they're just, that's the essence of liberalism. If we, the essence of liberalism, it's great to have a slave, but if, why? Because the slave is a danger to us if he doesn't become like us. And for the slave to become like us, we must, destroy many of, the culture of barbarism that houses those slaves. And so that's still the same, I mean, if you, the whole issue, of Islam and Islamophobia, and we don't want immigrants.
Well, that's a fantastic segue to focus in on Gaza a little bit, because I want you, Ali, to explain to me, how does Israel's US-backed genocide in Gaza fit into the context of this capitalist, imperialist world order? In other words, how does this genocide in Gaza serve imperialism?
Well, the whole issue, it's the occupation of Palestine and, the rise of the settler colonial state is not difficult to understand. It's there, for everybody to see as facts proceeding in history. I mean, what you have is you have a native population residing there. Then you have Europeans who are going to come, and say, look, we want to establish another homeland on this homeland by evicting and ethnically cleansing these people. And the way, they say we're here to advance Western civilization. It's not much of a civilization to advance. If you think about the waste that has been produced and the death and the pollutants, I'd be ashamed to say I belong to a Western civilization. But still, said, well, look, we're here to advance Western civilization. We'll be protecting you. And of course, protect, this is a system of continuous genocides and massacres. It just, the genocide is structured to the system. Count, 1, 2, 3, 4, somebody died, a child died. And, if you count the number of deaths from diseases unnecessarily and all this, from the misery, and the fact that people could live a lot longer relative to the technology and the resources that we have at this time. Yet in most of the third world, they live to around 50, 60 years old. That's premature death.
Well, yeah, Ali, real quick, just to give one statistic to go with what you're saying, I actually did not know this, but only 3%, before this current genocide, only 3% of people in Gaza made it to age 65. Isn't that crazy? I mean, you'll believe that easily, but that blew my mind. But
right, I've seen figures. I've seen figures. I don't know this particular figure, but I've seen figures. Of less than 50 years old of longevity in some parts of the third world. So it is a situation where we're going to protect the Western civilization, and in order to do so, and they say bluntly, these people are not going to accept us. The Arabs are not going to accept, this situation. So we have to fight them all the time. So it's a condition of constant war. And we have to fight them all the time. So what do they, to what, logically, to what issue do they contribute? They contribute to war, which is the extractivism of human lives, which is quite a profitable industry. And they make it, they make the power mesh of Europe and the US, this is something we call imperialism, much stronger, so it can dictate its terms upon the third world. It can say to Africa, look, we're winning everywhere, and we can do the same to you, and so you better give us the cocoa and the coffee and anything you have for a very cheap price. We don't care if you're not going to have enough to eat, because we just want that, because we're selling that to a market that we have in the north that's going to buy it from us. Or, it has, ramifications in the south, but it's centrally phenotypically white and in the north, right? Mainly phenotypically white. So you have that situation. And so Israel is pretty much, as a colonial settler project, is pretty much an extension of imperialism. I mean, unless, of course, somebody is going to say, like Professor Dana says, their God is playing real estate or something like that. But that's just so just it's too much to absorb. I mean, we are.
Well, so Ali, hold on a second. If Israel is an extension of U.S. imperialism, right, which is a very basic concept that I think makes sense, meaning that like the role of Zionism in the region is to reinforce and be like the police for U.S. imperialism, then by basic logic, would that suggest that those fighting the Israelis militarily are actually fighting U.S. imperialism?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, they're the same mesh you can see from the Gaza situation, right? The war and the atrocities that are committed in Gaza are under the surveillance and protection of Germans, French, Americans, and so on. So this is not. It's not a project. They know that this is their project, and this is and they say it costs us less than the Sixth Fleet in the Mediterranean. And Joe Biden, this thing that says it costs us so little, it's a good investment, and so they it's so obvious. I mean, there is no need to cover up the situation. What I'm saying here is that imperialism is about making money, but by making people poorer and by shortening their lives. And what Israel and the United States do, Israel is a condition of constant war of aggression. Because if you want to basically say, I'm going to displace people from this land and stay here, that means you have to kill everybody who belongs to this. And what do the Palestinians? The Palestinians are Arabs. They belong to the Arab nations. They're Muslims. They belong to the Muslim nation. They're also a part of the international proletariat. So they belong to the international proletariat, which is basically much of humanity. So you're basically, you're warring against the totality of the world population by saying, I want to settle here and kick these aboriginals, the natives out, and so on. So in constant war is constant profits. I mean, if you think about it, let's cut to the chase. Constant war is constant profits because the system makes money out of war, and it makes a tremendous amount of money out of war. War is not simply another industry in the system, mind you, right? This is a pretty important thing because if you redress power relations, you cannot make a chewing gum by getting Arab gum from Sudan if you don't have the power structure to dictate to Sudan from all the wars that you exercise, that I want the Arab gum from you for a very cheap price.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like it's all limited, it's all interconnected. The power mesh is interconnected. And it's a power mesh that's also worse yet, it's a power of ideas. This powerful class also creates ideas that reproduce it time and again. So the system reproduces basically by ideas that say, look, the other guy, if he can't develop and he can't live, it must be a fault in his culture, a fault in his religion, a fault in his tradition, or something, a fault in the weather. You must create some fault. But the point is, it's people. China has proven, for instance, that one of the poorest countries in the world can develop and thrive when it's sovereign, it has the capacity to defend itself, and it defines who can mingle in its territory and who cannot.
Yeah.
That sort of example of sovereign development is there. So we know that we cannot develop in the developing world because we are beaten all the time. That's the point, that we are beating and that we are being wasted. Our lives are being wasted way before their time. Is the process that's this law of capital or this law of profitability,
And
and
the
the war
Europeans.
in
Oh,
Gaza.
well, no, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Finish what you were going to say about Gaza. I just wanted to make a silly point, but go ahead.
yeah, the war in Gaza just is part and it's a principal part of the war against humanity. Why? Because there are two points of contention, two crucial points, geographic point: Taiwan and Israel. And Israel is much more important than Taiwan in basically making sure that
Really?
the Arab, the Muslim and African masses, the Asian and African masses, are split down the line by this slice, near the Sinai Peninsula there. So it's a geographically strategic point that divides the world, divides the masses, and does not let them, divides Africa from Asia, and that's a big division. There are no roads between Africa and Asia, and the third world cannot trade with each other on land because of this. Apart from the fact that the power structure is so tilted as a result of imperialist victories throughout history and the killings of imperialism.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting that you just said that Israel's more important than Taiwan. I was just going to make a point about, and this is just a rhetorical point for fun, but it would be funny if, could you imagine if like we talked about Europeans the way they talk about us? Like, although it would be a little bit more true about Europe, like something's deeply culturally wrong if all you know how to do is like destroy countries in the global south and steal their resources. It's like a cultural deficiency. Um, that said, Ali, I wanted to ask you before, because I do want to also get to China. But I wanted to ask you about Western Marxists, because you've written about this. There's a chapter in your book, the recent book, Accumulation of Waste, about the Western Marxist position on war. And you speak
Mm.
of this sort of the dominant, I'm quoting you, the dominant currents of Western Marxism aligned with NATO. So I'm curious, who are these particular Marxists you're speaking of, who are aligned with NATO, and have their positions shifted at all with the genocide in Gaza? Do you think they understand the Western imperialist destruction of Gaza? And I'll extend that to Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Lebanon. Or is there like a similar sort of line that you could, or a similar thread between how they are about, or how their view is about NATO and how it is about the Middle East?
Well, it's, I mean, and I said at one point, something pretty obvious, right? That, you have people in power that reproduce in the Western world, that reproduce by demonizing the other. They have to say that the other is insufficient. They need theories. They need many theories for this. Usually, the theory that's represents the contrarian theory to the system that says, look, you can't let profits guide, or the laws of capital guide, things, because it seems that we are making money out of our self-dissolution. Well, how do we make money out? If you look at the planet, we are a planet that's going to die, and we're still making profit. So we're making profit from the death of the planet, the very destruction of the planet. Uh, because we know that is ipso facto true. That is true after, of the fact itself, and after the fact, ex post facto, after the fact. We know that this is true because the planet is in such a situation. It is the phenomena that we need to explain. And so the people in power, they're not, it doesn't take much to know that, you need to undermine the theories that are going to contradict our theories. And since we are in power and we have many platforms of media, many platforms of culture, universities, and so forth, we must, and most of the all the international organizations almost, right? So, we must deploy all of these apparatuses that we have in the production of ideas that basically undermines any theory that says that what we are doing is wrong. Mm-hmm. So the war of ideas is pretty important because you want to make people, accept, the dominant ideas. What are the dominant ideas? I'm going to accept that the planet should be destroyed because we're living in a world of scarcity, and the market is the best thing that we have, and to make profits, and it creates jobs because communism failed and socialism failed, and we look at the Soviet Union, it failed. History is presented like a football match. They lost, we won, so we go home and watch TV. So it's like that, really, and so it's not like a continuum where after the Soviet Union fell, you had a disastrous situation in the East, in Eastern Europe, and so on. And it remains so. The social conditions so much deteriorated, and whatever accomplishment the Soviet Union it did under conditions of hardships and Cold War and arms race and so forth. And so, and if people recall many of the benefits that we have in the world today, like maternity leave and higher wages and all of this, so this is a product of, there's a struggle between the two camps in the 20th century. So the war of ideas, when they realized that this war of ideas, that we don't want to lose the war of ideas, they deployed all their apparatuses, all their universities, and all their media to say, look, and they specifically targeted Marxism because, a recent interview with Gabriel Rockhill in Monthly Review recently explains the extent to which they have funded and deployed Marxists who were anti-imperial, pro-imperialist. That let us, for instance, attack Iraq because Iraq has a fascist government, and fascism is worse than imperialism. So let imperialism save people from fascism. That sort of argument that occurs everywhere.
No, it worked though. They did with Syria.
Yeah, in one way or another, So and so what you have is a situation where they discovered that before they produce anything like a polluted commodity, any commodity is a polluted commodity. Anything, the napkin, anything produces much more pollution, and you have to beat up people and practically make them live shorter lives to consume what you are consuming, and all that cost, that social cost that's carried by society. All of that in order to say, look, let us we're now going, there is no alternative. The West is much more advanced and capitalism is progressive. Look where we are. And so, for them, they have to be like us. It's still the same thing, like the liberalism. If they're not like us, they're a danger to us. Mm-hmm. And if they're not like us and a danger to us, they can be slaves. That's the principal logic of liberalism. I mean, if you go back to John Locke, he was a slave owner.
But you point out numerous theoretical problems in their approach to the question of imperialism. When we're talking about Western Marxists here, that it's be it you call it empiricism, the lack of periodization of imperialism, and so on. Could you explain to us the main difference between your approach and how they, meaning the Western Marxists who you're criticizing, approach the question of imperialism, if not, inter-imperialism?
Well, much of the approach, it all hinges on the idea that capitalism is progressive. That if you can't, it is better to be exploited by capitalism than not to be exploited by capitalism. Because if you're not exploited by capitalism, you sort of live in the forests and you are a hunter-gatherer. And when you're exploited by that, true, we bomb you a little bit, but we bring in a factory or two and we give you an oil well or something like this, and you're better off as a result of this. There is this, of course, this logic is absurd, because all these there is no such thing as you can't go back in time. Time for them is something that is homogeneous and quantitative, whereas time is qualitative. Time is the time in which people live. We live in a time where we could live to 100 years old, but we're living to 50 because, and it's not because of natural causes. In 1500 or 1000 BC or something like that, people lived to 30 because their nature and diseases could only let them live to 30. There was no other possibility. So this system, in comparison, is a far worse system than any system that has existed, because it actually deprives people of something. And that's essentially the definition of capital. It deprives people of the resources which they have produced. And the planet altogether is a single unit of production. There is nothing that could work if the planet wasn't integrated. We know that the planet is integrated because, if the Federal Reserve of the United States raises the interest rate, there could be, starvation or wars elsewhere because the indebted countries can't service their debts, or food prices rise because the commodity market, commodity prices rise in the commodity exchange, and so on and so forth. So the world is interlocked and interrelated in all aspects, in real production aspects, in technology aspects, and so forth. And the worst forms of capitalism, and the more are the best forms of capitalism, where we say that capitalism is least progressive and people are dying. That's where the most exploitation exists, because these people are giving all their labor in a shorter time span and leaving over their life a lot more to capital than profits, in surplus labor, in profits, and so well, surplus labor mediated into profits. It's not something. So it is really. The issue is time is of qualitative nature, and we need to and imperialism is actually intensified capital, and the best forms of capitalism for capital are not in the Nordic countries. That's these are formations that benefit from the power structure of capital, and their wages are a dividend based on the imperialist war as a result of the power structure that NATO and the United States provide. The issue is that the most exploitative is in the third world, because if you think about it, the reason why the third world can't produce anything, does not have leisure time, cannot produce machines, because if you keep beating them up, the machines and all the knowledge is only going to be produced in Europe and in the United States. There is no historical potential for anything there to arise there, because they can't eat, they're at war constantly, and so on and so forth, right? So So what is the reason then, we ask, if this is the case, right? If the only way, if the only place where universities and knowledge and R&D can occur in Europe, and then what is the reason? Is it because they're smarter than other people? They're smarter than Africans, smarter? No, they're not smarter, unless, of course, they're racist, of course. But the point is, they got this possibility to develop the productive machine and the productivity and the leisure and so on, because they cannot allow anybody else to do that, because if everybody else does this, then if competing for profits will drive down their profits, will drive down their dividends. They want to take cheap things in order to make profits. And they're taking cheap things, they must take lives.
Yes.
And they must take lives, they make war. And if they make war, they make money out of war as well. So it's all, and if they pollute, they actually, if I'm an industrialist who pollutes, I make money out of the pollution. I make money out of the pollution because, in two ways. First of all, pollution sells. Pollution is also going to cause people to get sick, and they're going to pay for medical care, which is when privatized, or society is going to cover the cost. And also, pollution cuts lives, shorter. It's like a war on the potentiality of life, and so pollution makes money for them, because the cost of the reproduction of society is lower, and it leaves more over the life cycle. Remember, you see, everything that the market economy and these people do is the ideas and the concepts they construct are weapons, are sort of chimeras. They're sort of fictions that people believe in. Like, I went to the store and I bought a can of Coke for I paid $1.
I want to bring up one of the weapons they use in a very practical way. So this is just to follow up on what we're talking about. There is this tendency among this particular crowd of Western Marxists that we're discussing, especially, to describe the current historical moment that we're in as one featuring this battle between various imperialist countries, right? They'll draw on Lenin's work to tell us that Russia and China, and at times they'll even say Iran, are as imperialist as the US. And your work, you have taken the time to debunk this construct. So can you tell us more about what kind of acrobatic and theoretical gestures these people perform to reach these conclusions and their practical implications?
Right. I mean, again, this goes back to the idea that capitalism is like a sausage, and you can have capitalism. There are social relations. Social relations are power relations. Power relations are ideas also, because ideas are powerful there. And so you have ideas that are reproducing reality, and these ideas are also in synergy with reality. They are formed on the basis of reality, and they change on the basis of reality. So you have this mix of real conditions developing and ideas developing together. And so what is the principal idea that is making the system tick? The principal idea is that you have this notion that you need to make money. You need to make things in order to make money, and not to make useful things. And you need to shift the costs onto society. And it is the principal progenitors of these ideas is the Western Hemisphere. It's where these ideas of the market, that we need to make money, and they're competing with everybody. It's true that they're competing with everybody, but they have the weight of history behind them. They have something, they've accumulated so much power, and they made the stock of knowledge that they have formulated, absorbed by people, such that it is possible. People reflexively do what their knowledge wants them to do, without questioning. And so within the system, there are capitalists who basically are nationalist capitalists or socialists, who negate the structure, who want to retain more of the wealth, right? But they have a different approach to retaining more of the wealth. They're not exercising this by demonizing others, by attacking others. They are, in a sense, protecting themselves from the barbarity of this system of waste that has been created by the West. And so they need to defend themselves against the people who say that there's sub-imperialism or what have you. Again, the sausage mentality is ridiculous. Why? Because they don't understand that there's a structure of power involved in reproducing the conditions of waste, the conditions of capital. And that structure of power, that pyramidical structure of power, has the United States and its allies atop the triad, Europe, Japan, the United States, sitting atop the pyramid that is exercising this. And the nations have the right to defend themselves against the aggression of that system. And that's what these people don't see, obviously. They see capitalism as, they reify it. They see it as money moving to Asia, therefore Asia is becoming richer, Asia is imperialist, Russia is imperialist, China is imperialist, or Iran or something for Turkey. You can divide this up to the point where the grocery store owner could become an imperialist.
Oh man, I love that. I gotta use that joke sometime. That's a good one, Ali. I guess we're just gonna spend some time beating up on this particular group of Western Marxists whose individual names shall not be named, but we know who we're talking about, and I think a lot of people watching do. But I want to ask, how central was the war in Syria in the last decade and shaping the political landscape of the region, and how clear? I want to ask how clear the positions of numerous Western Marxists become as the war on national sovereignty of the Syrian Arab Republic was unleashed by the U.S. and NATO. Why is their failure to destroy Syria so crucial to understanding the current events in Gaza as well? And I know I just asked you 3 questions in one. So let me just go back to the initial one first. And that is, how central was the war in Syria to shaping the political landscape of the region? And then has this clarified how bad the position of some Western Marxists were?
Well, I mean, sometimes in the regarding Syria, the humanitarian dimensions always takes, the West tries to focus on partial truth, and there's and this on this because they construct a lot of partial truth here and there. But speaking of the humanitarian dimension and the fact that capitalism and whoever is at the helm of capitalism, which is the international financial class, which is structurally based in the United States and Europe, right? They must have a face and they have a name, and this international financial class, which is in the lead of global development, is the reason why we have the structural genocide and other genocides, because they push the idea that we need to make money at any cost, and so they they create the hunger, the diseases, the misery, and the war. So they create the structural genocide and the direct genocides. So everything else is, all the world, is sort of in a position of self-defense against this. So Syria is one nation which was in a position of self-defense as well, because Palestine is historically part of Syria as well. So it's part of the Arab population which was dispossessed, and so it was aggressed. It was aggressed by the Israelis, and the Israelis, of course, are backed by the Americans and the British and the Europeans, so on, and they're armed with nuclear weapons. So you have a situation where a country is trying to survive, which has very meager resources. It doesn't have capital. It doesn't have physical capital much. It was under French colonialism, and the French slaughtered as they could, in Syria, which the usual work of colonialism. And they left it when they left it in tatters. There was nothing almost there, and so it was a state in a position of self-defense. And if you're an imperialist with a little money, you can buy a lot of people inside the country to destroy the country as well, if you want to destroy the country. And they do that everywhere, not only in Syria. Syria is no exception. I mean, wherever you have, a country which is trying to say, look, we want to keep more of our resources for ourselves. We want to grow as well. We want to live a better life. We want to live longer. our longevity is 50. We want to make it 60 or 70. Well, they'll say, they'll send a few NGOs and, they'll put an army base or something. And Syria is no exception. I mean, it's not so difficult to understand these issues. And it was being aggressed. It was being aggressed. It is aggressed all the time. I mean, it was aggressed all the time. In the end, if you could, and it had suffered first of all, there was the neoliberal onslaught. The idea that after the fall of the Soviet Union, only the market works.
Mm-hmm.
No, nothing works if you become like us. You become a marketeer, a free marketeer. You're going to be, and that they got that. They foolishly enough, they believed in this idea, the Syrians, and it was to their detriment because the minute you get the market in, it becomes easy. You create the social division that makes it easy for imperialism to buy into with very few dollars. When somebody's making $50 a month, you could buy an army for $1 million or two, or something like that, right? So, for very little money, you could mobilize against the regime that doesn't like you, that you wanted to attack for a long time, and you can do this from the inside. So first of all, you're conquered by the ideas of neoliberalism, and then the divisions come in and do that. But the fact that Syria had survived to an extent, what has happened, the onslaught against it, has changed the power structure of the region because you're talking about, again, a very strategic region. Well, all regions are strategic, but this region in particular, it oversees the oil resource flowing out of it, and it's also it's a war region, and war is just as important as oil in the way it destroys people because people have a price too, just like oil, and so it has become it has shifted the balance of power and created this corridor between Iran to South Lebanon, which is an axis of resistance against the state of Israel, which is against the United States imperialism. It's not Israel per se, it's all, the United States imperialism. So the global power structure, because Syria could maintain a presence as a state and not dissolve into some mix of interwarring parties forever, that situation has created a sort of axis that could confront U.S. imperialism, and people must confront U.S. imperialism one way or another, right? Why so? Because if you're going to take away my field and my life, and take away my resources, if communism does not fit me as an ideology to fight you, I'm going to, go for green ideology or for Islamic ideology or for Pan-Africanism or Pan-Arabism. The class that is being beaten is going to take the cultural forms from its own history and mold these cultural forms into an ideology of resistance. And also what we're seeing now is much of, before it used to be the communism and socialism, now it's becoming, Islamic culture that is housing the ideology of resistance in Gaza. But it's still a class struggle. It's still a class. What is a class struggle? It's people who are trying to live, but they're not allowed to live. The people who are not allowed to live are the working classes, are the proletarians of this world. And the people who are killing them are the bourgeoisie, the financial bourgeoisie of this world. And so you have this situation which is unfolding. And again, it's pretty crucial that, it was very, very important for the axis of resistance and for the third world to keep Syria from collapsing, as other states.
As we can see in Gaza right now, Syria not collapsing, not losing Syria in that axis of resistance is crucial to Gaza's ability to fight back. Without Syria, you could argue it wouldn't be possible. Like you mentioned, this corridor, and also Lebanon. Would Lebanon without Syria have the ability to stand up to the forces of American empire in the region? Israel being it. I mean, that's what's so crucial here. And it kind of is amazing to me that those who were, quote, ostensibly, or at least calling themselves leftists and Marxists, who were advocating for the destruction of Syria, for the collapse of the Syrian government, and continue to do that when it comes to Iran, are sitting here claiming that they are against genocide in Gaza when had it not been for the existence of these states that you hate so much and want to collapse, there would be no resistance. And then that's what's so crucial. I mean, just to summarize what you're saying here, I want to ask you, Ali, about, because another country that you've written about that you alluded to this earlier is China. I think, you know, I want to talk about China's path to development, because we've talked a lot about this world that imperialism, Western imperialism has created, where, you know, they're just killing people, stealing resources. It's this accumulation of waste and death. It's a horrific, horrific system that causes people to have shorter lives and that kills so many around the world. And then you have China, and China's path to development differs very much from the Western one. And before the genocide in Gaza captured the world's attention, you know, Western politicians and media were just constantly throwing these temper tantrums over the rise of China's economy. So as we enter into this era of emerging multipolarity with, you know, an increasingly prosperous China, an increasingly powerful China, a country, again, whose development you have written a book about, I want to ask, how did China avoid the path to neoliberalism? And why is it important for socialists to understand that as it becomes more and more clear that our options are either, you know, this imperialist barbarism or an alternative socialist path?
Right. Again, China was one of the poorest countries in the world. You know, you're talking about a life expectancy of 31 years old in 1948, 49 or something like that. I don't recall the numbers, but it was pretty low and pretty poor. No electricity, no water, nothing. And so you know, you're starting out from a zero position, you know, in the fight to build capacity. And if you look, and it's a country that was hungry, literally hungry. I mean, we're talking about hunger predominantly. You know, I mean, you've got the biggest population in the world always. Historically, it's the country with the highest population in the world. And so here's the revolution under the Communist Party of China, the leadership of the Communists. Takes a country so huge. And the first block in the transformation of the country was to feed the country. You know, you're going to feed hundreds of millions of people. And then the first thing to do was the agricultural revolution. So to basically make a revolution in agriculture, and the success of which is the basis for all the letters. Because if you can feed and house and clothe and so forth, you provide the basic minimum under Mao Zedong. You can do whatever later. You also created all the means of the classical education and knowledge and pure sciences and so forth. So this was a period from, let's say, from 1950 to 1975. I don't recall the numbers exactly here, but if you take out the fall in production that occurred in 60, 61, 62, when the split with the Soviet Union happened, we must understand that China is part of, under Stalin, it was part of the vision for a Soviet Asia. So, I mean, the aid that it received from the Soviet Union was tremendous to make what it made. So when the split occurred, there was a huge drop in production. So if you take that out, if you take that period out, if you conclude that period, the growth rate, average growth rate, is going to be between 6.5%, let's say, between, you know, or around 6%, let's say, between 50 and 75. Now, if you smooth that period out, then the growth rate will be about closer to 9%. Mm-hmm. Now, if you take the period 1975 to 2020, the growth rate is also going to be 8.5%. So we have a continuity. When they say the market economy worked in China, they're forgetting that what was before was also working. And it was the basis that came after, which was not a market economy. It was something like a new economic program that everything we've allowed the private sector to operate, but we are in control. So you could be a billionaire, but the land upon which your factory is built is the state and the people's. And where you put your money in the bank is the states and the people. Consume as much as you want, but your billions are the states and people's money, which are going to be redeployed to making more wealth in the nation. Why? Because we don't allow you to take your money out. There's something called capital control. So when you have strong agricultural policy, and I can go out here, I'm in China now, and I can go out here to buy things, and there's no inflation, things are relatively cheap, everybody saves, and there's practically full employment. And if I go out to buy things, that's what I'm going to see. I'm going to see very, very good, plenty of things, unlike before, because I remember the wars of colonialism have destroyed the capacity of China to rise. The idea that you can take a country which had nothing into a country that is now one of the leading nations in the world is a tremendous project that has been undertaken under the leadership, and it's a model for us insofar as making sure that your people have the essentials and housing and food and all of this, and also clamping your capital accounts and letting your money work for you and your people work for you. Not sending the best people out to the United States, and not sending the billions that you're earning to Swiss banks. And so the story of development is very simple. You want to keep everything, and it's a story of success. So it's a story. When you're sovereign, you make a decision, and you have a party in power that is committed to the people. Because if you look at the CPC, it has a membership of 100 million people, which means that there is one CPC member in every family across the board. So there might be opportunists there who probably want, but it's very difficult to make opportunities within this party. Why? Because everything is discussed at the grassroots level, and it filters to the top, and the decision is taken after a lot of democratic processes that occurred within the decision-making process of the nation. So there is nothing that's going to steer the nation in an anti-national position. And they're not going to do something to harm themselves in the end. So now, if you think about the development, and they have a longevity higher than the United States, and that's the principal signifier of development. They live longer than people in the United States. And if you look at the purchasing power parity income, the 90% own their homes, I don't remember, and transport is cheap and things like that. And they worked on the environmental issue. They have huge advances in reducing pollutions in their cities and making sure that they recycle and so on. So it proves that this waste process that occurs in the West, I need to basically extract people and extract resources to live, that could be reversed. If when China invests in Africa, it builds roads, it builds airports, ports, whatever. It doesn't go there like the IMF or the United States, because the IMF is the United States. It doesn't go there to say, I'm going to stabilize your currency, but I need you to cut hospitals and education. China goes there to invest, to put some product, and it's going to lend money because it's carrying a lot of dollars. That it pretty much is a nuisance to China, because when you put dollars in the United States, they're not yours. Look at what's going to happen to Russia, right? And so the whole system works in such a way to undermine. And when you build in the developing world, when you improve people's lives with better infrastructure, you're doing exactly the opposite thing that the United States does. What does the United States do? It comes to destroy. It comes to bomb. If it doesn't bomb, it has a military base beside the country, and it's going to whisper to that country, look, you do what we want, or else we're going to bomb you. And so it's just like they're being bombed. Whereas in China is doing exactly. So what China is doing is something like a people's war exercised on a global scale. It's
Wow.
the same people's war that it did, and it's an anti-imperial. How could China be imperialist when it's doing that? So it is clearly the anti-imperialist embodiment, and yet, you see some Marxists in the United States and Europe, and we're saying, look, China is imperialist. It's lending to Africans, and it's doing this and that, which is absolutely, nauseating in a sense.
It is. It really is. I love that explanation you just gave. And Ali, this was a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I'm so happy I got to have you on. And I want to hopefully be able to do this again sometime. And I just want to remind people that your recently published book, which just came out this summer, is once again titled The Accumulation. Hang on, let me find it so I say it right. All of you academics, your titles are so long. The Accumulation of Waste, a Political Economy of Systemic Destruction. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.